Russian airstrikes have hit two children's hospitals in Ukraine. The mayor of Zhytomyr, west of the capital Kiev, say bombs fell on a children's hospital there. And in the besieged city of Mariupol in the south, a series of blasts hit a maternity hospital where women were giving birth. President Volodymyr Zelenskyy is calling Russia's attacks on civilians a genocide.
Today, we must be united in condemning this war crime of Russia, which reflects all the evil that the occupiers have brought to our land. All of the destroyed cities and everything they've done. The bombing of a maternity hospital is conclusive evidence that what is happening is a genocide of Ukrainians.
Well, Russia says reports it bombed that children's hospital in Mariupol are fake news, claiming Ukrainian troops had taken over the building. But Western allies say the Russian military is using weapons indiscriminately and warn the assault could turn even more brutal. Ukrainian officials say the bombing left patients, including children, buried in the rubble. A warning, this report contains some disturbing images.
Another explosion rocks the besieged city of Mariupol. But the target was no military installation. A children's hospital, now in ruins after a direct hit from an apparent Russian airstrike. Ukrainian authorities report at least 17 injuries and fear many more may still be trapped inside. The World Health Organization has verified 18 attacks on health facilities and workers since the start of the invasion. In statements on Wednesday, it called on Russia to commit to a peaceful resolution and allow humanitarian aid to reach those in need.
This violence is breaking, it's breaking bodies, it's breaking minds, and it's breaking souls, and it must stop. But it is not the doctors and the nurses, it is not the humanitarians that can stop this violence.
Russia's invasion continues to meet heavy resistance. But military analysts warn that Russian forces are increasingly shelling civilian areas. In the northeastern city of Sumy, the first successful humanitarian corridor, desperate Ukrainians managed to flee during a pause in the fighting. While further west, hundreds more flee the Kiev city of Irpin, crossing a damaged bridge that Russian troops have repeatedly fired on as civilians tried to get across. But even as some managed to escape during the ceasefire, air raid sirens sound in Kiev, warning people to stay indoors. Thousands face another long night sheltering in Kiev's metro stations, finding what safety they can underground.
Well, DW correspondent Nick Connolly joins us now from the Ukrainian capital, Kiev. Nick, what's the situation on the ground there?
Here in Kiev, it is very, very quiet. Basically, you only see soldiers and journalists and an occasional local out trying to get some food from the supermarkets that are still open. But it's a city that, unlike Mariupol, unlike Kharkiv, has yet to see the kind of bigger air raids and destruction to civilian accommodation. I think it's partly down to better anti-aircraft protection here, and also seemingly an attempt by the Russians to try and encircle Kiev before they start those attacks in Sirius. We have Russian troops in the northeast, the city in the northwest, about 25 kilometers away from where I am now, in Irpin, that suburb that's seen some of the worst of the destruction. I think most viewers will have seen that destroyed bridge, people trying to get out, people dying, civilians dying, trying to get out with their families and whatever baggage they have on them. But it's a city that's basically expecting worse to come in the next few days.
In what is already a dire, tense situation, Nick, how was the news received on the ground that a total of 3 hospitals had been attacked on Wednesday, 2 of them children's hospitals?
Most people I've spoken to don't really have anything, don't find any words, because it is just so shocking. I think it is, clear to people now that this is all-out war. This is definitely not the special operation that Vladimir Putin is trying to call it. This is a war of the kind that Europe really hasn't seen probably since the Second World War, and people are expecting this to get a lot bloodier and a lot more dangerous for civilians in the days to come. We've had those failed attempts at civilian corridors to get people out of Mariupol. Those have failed several times. The Ukrainians say that the Russians are just not sticking to their side of the bargain, are not keeping to temporary ceasefires to allow civilians out of that city that has been under siege now for days and is without power, without mobile phone networks, and increasingly low on food. I think the main message that Ukrainians are taking out of this is that they are going to keep on demanding the West closes the skies above Ukraine, creates a no-fly zone, because they say this is just a situation where this is not war as, according to the rules, this is a war that is going to cause huge civilian casualties, and basically this is at Europe's conscience. If the West, if the US allows Russia to keep its dominance in the skies, we're going to see more hospitals, more children dying at home, in their schools, in hospitals, and this is going to be something that we're going to see again and again. So there's more push from Zelenskyy, from other Ukrainian figures. We've seen Ukrainians gathering petitions, thousands of people signing them. They're going to send those west in the hope that maybe the West will think again and will risk more direct confrontation with Russia and create that kind of no-fly zone that could allow Ukraine a better chance of winning this war, because on the ground, in kind of ground fighting between units on the ground, the Ukrainians are doing pretty well. The Russians are having big logistical issues. So the Ukrainian feeling is, if they have that safety from above, and if the Russians are not allowed to bomb cities, but also Ukrainian military, then they have a much better chance of keeping their country.
Briefly, Nick, the mayor of Mariupol stated that over 1,000 civilians have already been killed there by Russian bombing in the last 9 days. Now hospitals have been bombed. Where does this leave negotiations between Ukraine and Russia?
It's kind of extraordinary to think that, yes, today we're expecting a meeting between the foreign ministers of Russia and Ukraine. How they can negotiate with any kind of trust for each other is very difficult to see. I think right now it's about the optics. Neither side wants to be seen to not be open to talks. But from the Russian side, we've seen no real shift. They're still demanding basically capitulation from Ukraine to give up its army, to accept Russia's annexation of Crimea, to recognize that, and to basically give up Luhansk and Donetsk regions. So I don't see very much space for any kind of development, any kind of closening of the positions. I think for now it's just about showing the international community that both sides are open to dialogue, to not allow yourself to be accused of being closed to those talks. But I think there's not much real hope here in Kiev that those talks are going to get anywhere.
Nick Connolly in Kiev, thanks for your reporting. Well, the United Nations says around 2.2 million people have now fled Ukraine. Most of them are women and children, often leaving loved ones behind to fight, not knowing whether they'll see each other again. The majority of the refugees are arriving in Poland. DW's Alexandra von Namen sent us this report from a border crossing in Ukraine.
One last embrace before they say goodbye. Vadim has brought his family to the Polish border so they can leave the country. He will be heading back to the front lines.
It is because of the kids. No one wants to leave their home. It's so hard. You can't explain it. It's hard. We don't know whether we're going to see each other again.
It was so good to have them by my side. When you're together with your family, you feel better. Now I'll be alone, but I know they'll be safe.
And its safety is just a few meters away. We are at the border checkpoint in Shehini, the busiest border crossing between Ukraine and Poland. Those who are now here have been waiting for hours, just like Natalia and her twins. They escaped the Russian bombardments in Kharkiv in eastern Ukraine.
We've been through a lot. You're sitting in the hall or in the cellar with your children while they're bombing the city, and you don't know, will a bomb drop now and that's it? What did we do to deserve that?
Natalia doesn't believe that the war will be over soon. Many Ukrainians seem to think the same, and so the lines at the border are not getting any shorter.
People on the move, both inside and outside the country, in desperate need of protection and support. As Russia's war with Ukraine continues, an estimated 4 million people may flee the country, according to the United Nations.
Hot tea and snacks for free, distributed by Ukrainian and international volunteers along the road to the border. This is where we meet Natalia from Kiev. She's traveling alone with her 3 children.
The children are suffering the most because my husband had to stay in Kiev. They cry. My oldest son keeps asking, will we never ever see Dad again? Then he starts crying again.
The UN has called it the fastest growing refugee crisis in Europe since World War II. This is what it looks like in real life.
Well, despite frequent shelling of populated areas by Russia, US military officials say there's been little change on the ground over the past 24 hours. But one area where Russian troops may be making progress is in the city of Mykolaiv, which has seen heavy fighting. Mykolaiv is key to Russia's bid to seize control of Ukraine's Black Sea coast. The city of almost 500,000 is located near the city of Odessa, which is Ukraine's main port. Mykolaiv has come under heavy bombardment from Russian artillery. Well, joining me from Mykolaiv in Ukraine is the regional governor, Vitaliy Kim. Thank you for speaking to us at this very difficult time. Let me begin by asking if the city of Mykolaiv is still under Ukrainian control.
Yeah, the city of Mykolaiv is still under our control, and also we moved forward to the Kherson and Sigirovka.
And in terms of the basics, food, water, heating, what are conditions like for people in the city right now?
About food, medicine and water, it's okay in the city, in the big cities, in our region. In small cities, not small cities, small villages, there are some problems, but we are making our logistics to provide them all they need. There is no catastrophe, but we need some storage because we have only one way of supply for now, one road for supply for now.
And do you have a sense, do you have accurate updates? Where exactly are the Russian forces right now in relation to your city?
Yes, I have all that data about this, but I won't tell you about it because they are moving, and this is secret information. I won't give you it.
Understood. How likely is it that Russian forces will end up occupying the city as they have in Kherson? Do you still have hope that they can be stopped at this point?
There is. If you will be in Mykolaiv, you will see by your own eyes that we are not going to leave our city in any way. And I think that we are going to attack and to renew our territory. The enemy is very exhausted. He has no motivation. He has no fuel. We need more power and more vehicles for attack. That's all. I think that this is the turning point of this war. I don't believe they can move forward fastly anymore.
After 2 weeks of being under the stress of invasion, what about the mentality of your people? How are they holding up?
Our mentality is now for 100% Ukrainian. Any small village resists the occupant. We don't communicate with Russian. We do not make any deals with them. We don't like them. We want them to go home. And this is the common idea of our region and of our country.
Aside from those who choose to stay and fight, in terms of communication with the Russians, part of that is organising safe passage out of the city for civilians. Are efforts underway? Do they continue? Are you getting civilians out who need to get out of that city?
Yes, we have free ways, free road that civilian can move out from our city or region. And first of all, it's women and children. For now, many of strong men, they are moving to the city to help us for the fighting. So we are growing with our war power, and we are waiting and looking forward for attack.
Vitaliy Kim, Governor of Ukraine's Mykolaiv region, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you.
Now here's a look at some of the other developments now in the conflict. And the US House of Representatives has approved a massive spending bill that includes $13.6 billion of aid to Ukraine and European allies. The funds will cover the costs of sending US troops and weapons to Eastern Europe, as well as care for refugees. US Vice President Kamala Harris is in Warsaw for talks with Polish leaders. Tensions are high after the United States rejected a proposal from Poland to transfer MiG-29 fighter jets to a US airbase and then deliver them onward to Ukraine. After concluding her visit to Poland, Harris will then head to Romania. Washington is warning of a potential chemical or biological weapons attack by Russia in Ukraine. It comes after Moscow accused the US of supporting a bioweapons program in Ukraine. The Biden administration believes the accusation could be an attempt by the Kremlin to justify such an attack. Well, many Western military analysts have expressed surprise at the apparent struggle Russian forces are having at pressing their invasion of Ukraine. Their progress on the ground has remained largely unchanged for days, and they still do not control the skies, despite an enormous advantage in troop numbers, ground force artillery and air power. Russian military planners have underestimated Ukraine's determination, apparently, to resist. Russian troops have also been slowed by reports of shortages of fuel and other supplies. Russia has one of the world's largest standing armies, but many of its conventional forces still use decades-old equipment and appear to suffer from poor maintenance. Given the harder-than-expected fight, it's possible that Russia has not committed enough resources to the invasion of Ukraine. Well, to help us better understand Russia's military situation, I'm joined now by Gustav Gressel. He's a security and strategy analyst from the European Council on Foreign Relations. Welcome to you. The Russian forces invading Ukraine seem to be struggling, at least in the north and the northeast of the country. 2 weeks in, what's your assessment?
Well, the Russians have started this war on completely wrong assumptions. These were political assumptions, and they were basically determined by the Kremlin, and they were wrong. And that has of course, long-standing consequences on a lot of things. Logistics is one issue. They had, from the outstart of the war, not prepared for a big fighting war, and they don't have not only the logistics not in place, they don't have the logistical capabilities to quickly catch up with that in place. The second thing is that force generation. We heard the issue about conscripts being forced to sign contracts in order to move into war. Russia so far wants to wag the war with contract and professional soldiers only. That, of course, limits their overall force they can generate for this war. And they have used much of that already, and it hasn't brought the quick, decisive result they were looking for. So they're running into this problem as well.
That said, the Russian military advance along the south, the Black Sea coast, appears to have more success. Is that fair?
Yes. First of all, the terrain is easier. It's plain flat. There are fewer cities, fewer larger cities. So it gives fewer hold-ons for the Ukrainians to really defend on. The river crossings, Mykolaiv is sort of a city that is sort of important also because of the bridges there, basically provide some ground where the Ukrainians can pin down Russian forces. Otherwise, Russians, because the country is so huge, it looks small on a map, but it's actually very, very large, bypass Ukrainian defenses and just sort of roam around in the vicinity. That is more difficult in the north. You have more cities, so you have more ground. Ukrainians can properly defend there. Hence, the Ukrainians were quicker containing Russian advances there. Also from Crimea, logistics seem to be a bit simpler than through Belarus and through other parts of Russia.
The United States is now warning that Russia could resort to the use of chemical or biological weapons. Do you share that concern?
Well, it's not unrealistic. I mean, the Russians have claimed that Ukrainians would build nuclear weapons before the war as a kind of excuse for launching this, one of the many strawmans. And they have claimed that sort of in the nuclear power plants they conquered, they found a US-sponsored Ukrainian nuclear weapons program, which is, of course, a complete lie, but they're putting this up. Biological or chemical weapons, they have come up with rhetoric accusing Ukraine of that now, and sort of all kind of Russian propaganda accusations have to be treated as a warning of what Russia might instigate as a pretext in the coming days. The war isn't running according to their course, and they have difficulties mobilizing their society for the cause of war. Despite the repression, despite of the censorship of media, it's not going that well. So, of course, dramatizing and making this kind of accusations might help them mobilizing society behind the war as it is so far.
Just quickly, Gustav, is there any sign, zooming back out, that Russian forces will overcome these initial setbacks and intensify their invasion efforts?
They will intensify their invasion efforts. They are regrouping, they're reorganizing now, they're resupplying with ammunition, and I fear that this is not sort of the end of the war yet. However, if they stay within the current margins of force generation, that is professional soldiers and contract soldiers, they do not have a lot of growth potential from now. If Ukrainians withstand the second wave of assault, and Putin does not have a bigger consent domestically to escalate the war, Russia will have to look for a way out.
Gustav Gressel from the European Council on Foreign Relations, thanks so much.
Thank you very much.